Hey, greetings. This is Casabez Makma with Meridian World News. I'll be your host this evening. Um, I am very excited today because this is this is an idea that I've been having for a while to really bring some light to current events, bringing news that could be reliable, that could be trustworthy, because we can see that it's very difficult to find now in the age of fake news, in the age of Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Everyone's got their version of current events happening right now, and I wanted to bring an alternative to that, something that could be um, hopefully more honest than what we're used to seeing out here. So, um, this is our second broadcast, and already we've been working on getting a team together. You'll see more of them as we go, but today you're just going to be seeing my pretty face, so get used to that. Um, for those of you who are watching, welcome. And yeah, we're just going to get started. Really, the news, there's only one news that's been going on that everyone's been talking about lately, which is coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, whatever you want to call it. If you want to call it, the flu or whatever you want to call it, it's going on. It's really taking the world by storm. Um, the latest news right now is they are working on a vaccine, and now they're talking about having a vaccine available for first responders, in emergency situations, people who are in contact with people with the virus a lot, rolling that out to those workers as early as the fall if things move on. Already, testing has begun in um, the UK, England, and they're also talking about starting in Kenya. Um, let's see what they have to say from CNN about this vaccine that's now coming very quickly.
We are targeting fall. I'm sorry, we're targeting fall for the emergency use. So that would be, for health.
From anybody you meet who finds out what you do, any idea when a vaccine, assuming that this vaccine works, when it might be available for use?
Yeah. So, we are targeting fall. I'm sorry, we're targeting fall for the emergency use. So that would be, for healthcare workers and people who might be in constant contact and risk of being exposed over and over. And then for the general population, our target goal is for next spring. And that is if all things go well and if these phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials work simultaneously for the good, our plan is to have people vaccinated all over the world by next spring.
So let me just be clear, because you're saying for the fall, it might be available, or your hope is, your plan is, if it works out in these clinical trials, is to have it available for emergency workers, first responders by the fall.
And so all of these timelines, I like to say the universe helps us to decide, right? So we could be lucky and not even be under this level of stress and containment. There might not be this level of exposure come fall. But if there is, there are mechanisms by which you can get a product approved for emergency use in people who might be exposed constantly.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Wow. Well, thank you for all you're doing. I hope this works.
We do too.
So, most recently, let's say a week or so ago, there was a hot discussion happening about.
Adams, thank you so much for being with us.
There was a discussion happening about two French doctors who had proposed that Africa might be the next best place to conduct vaccine research. There was a lot of pushback with people in Africa saying that they're not guinea pigs, that they don't want to be tested on. Now after this vaccine trial, the testing trials have started in UK. Now they're already talking about, again, Africa being the next place to roll out continued trials.
Area. Now, if they don't get early, quick results in the UK, they're considering a trial in Kenya, where the epidemic of coronavirus may well be on the rise. Now, this vaccine is known to produce a strong antibody response, but that doesn't necessarily equate to protection. And we're going to need many vaccines. There are dozens in development. So then we'll need billions of doses and expect a huge debate over which countries and which groups of people get the vaccine first.
Fergus Walsh, thank you.
So there's a lot more, news and current events that are happening. Of course, things people are talking about regarding this coronavirus that we want to get into today. However, we're just not going to have time to get into everything. But there are some things that before we really get into the current things, there's some back story that we need to cover a little bit first. There's been a lot of speculation about the cause of this virus, the agenda that different governmental and corporate structures have, and kind of how they're going about things right now. As you can see already, we're talking about how they're pushing these vaccines, but there's a lot of other questions. Starting with talking about the cause, we can look at let's say, for example, the first story. We were told that it came from this wet market and that that the virus naturally evolved from bats. Now, further research says that the particular bats, which allegedly they found a similar virus to this coronavirus, this particular strain of coronavirus that is now, they're telling us is the cause of all these problems, all these deaths and sicknesses and so on. That they evolved from bats, but then they're saying that the bats don't even live close by where that market is that supposedly began the spread. Then many of the first cases of coronavirus, now they go back and they're saying that most of them actually had no contact with that animal market. Additionally, come to find out that there is a biological research facility where they, study actual viruses, and so there's now a very, suspicious case being talked about, that virus having potentially emerged, whether accidentally or on purpose, from that facility. Again, in the city of Wuhan. And thirdly, the big thing that we're hearing, and this is the one that, people are now calling the conspiracy theory, is the 5G, the rollout of 5G around the world being the catalyst for this disease coming out. Now, today we're not going to have time to get into 5G. Definitely within the next, couple of episodes, we'll be talking about that some more. But that's not something that we're going to get into today. Moving forward, I just want to bring some questions. First of all, you can see, let's say in the United States, the hardest hit place undoubtedly is New York City, and the surrounding cities and suburbs close by there are getting hit really hard. There's a lot of people who, they've been saying are dying from this disease. And I want to, first of all, look at some of those statistics. So you can see in New York, the breakdown of deaths per county that you can see in Queens, over 3,000 people. Kings County, which is Brooklyn, that's 3,000 people. Bronx, over 2,000 people. New York, Nassau County, that's also Long Island, which is right next to Queens and Brooklyn. And then New York County, that's Manhattan, there's almost 1,500 deaths. So that's quite a few deaths being attributed to this. And I think it's important enough to put those deaths in context to look at um, the trends of how many people tend to die annually in so-called normal circumstances. And I say so-called normal because really nothing about the world we're living in now really is that normal. But we could say what's been the trend lately. Um, if you look at, say, if we remember Brooklyn, aka Kings, that was 3,000. Queens also 3,000. You look at the total deaths from the year of 2016, uh, almost 16,000 deaths in 2016. Queens, almost 15,000 deaths. So let's do a little bit of math. We are now at April 24th, which means that we are almost, as of April 30th, we'll be a third of the way through the year. So let's just, round it up and say we're a third of the way through the year. If we divide these deaths, the total deaths from Brooklyn, divide 15,000 plus by 3, we're going to be a little over 5,000. Compare that to 3,000 deaths now attributed to COVID-19 alone. Queens, same thing, just about 15,000 deaths divided by 3 to give us 1/3 of the year. That brings us to just about 5,000 deaths total. So, compare that to about 3,000 deaths from COVID-19 alone in 2020. So, we've also seen reports of, potentially they're looking at, comparing the death rate in New York this year so far compared to what's normal. And estimates are that it's close to double what it normally is in New York. So we can see that there definitely is something going on in New York, that there's something that really people are dying from at a higher rate than normal. And it's worth paying attention that there's something going on. Now, let's let's compare some more statistics. We have been told originally that this disease there's no cure. 3 to 5% of people who get it are dying, which is way, way, way more than, say 0.1%. Let's say, okay, for example, 0.1% is normal for the seasonal flu. 0.1% will mean 1 in 1,000 people who get the flu will die from it. Now compare that to 3 to 5%. That means 3 to 5%, 3% will be like 1 out of 33, whereas 5% would be 1 out of 20 people who get the COVID-19 coronavirus infection would be fatal for them. As more data comes out, we're seeing that it's much lower than that. It's really closer to maybe 1% or 0.5%, which is still a lot. But one thing I want to point out is there's a couple things I want to point out. And first of all, we regular people here, we have to just trust and take their scientists' word for it when they tell us about what this virus looks like, what this virus does, how this virus acts in the system, all of this stuff. Even that, when they're testing and they say a person's positive or a person's negative, us regular people, we just gonna have to take for granted that they're telling us the truth. We just have to believe what we're being told. If we decide not to believe what we're being told, then there's a lot that becomes questionable from that point. And I want to make sure that's clear because honestly, if we have to be honest with ourselves, we just don't know. We don't know what's happening, but we do see, okay, apparently there's more people dying in some places. And, not even just some places, a lot of places around the world. Um, Secondly, with the statistics and why these numbers are hard to trust, is there's two statistics that are most notable, which is the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus. Then sometimes when you're looking at some of these websites, they'll also show total of suspected cases, which it's hard to even say, how they'll qualify something as a suspected case. So let's just look at the confirmed cases. If you look at confirmed cases, the number of confirmed cases divided by the number, or let's say the number of deaths divided by the number of confirmed cases will give us the death rate, which would be like maybe 1% or, 0.1%, whatever, you see. But let's just look at the death rate that they're telling us. The smaller the confirmed cases is, and the higher the actual deaths are. Obviously, that makes the death rate higher. Now, you see the way they keep telling us that large scale testing is not possible. They're also telling people not to go to the hospital unless they're experiencing life-threatening issues. So that does a couple things. First of all, people who may have this disease are not getting tested. And so if they have the disease, they're not getting tested. That means that's not going into the count, you see. And if people are staying at home, they're not even being, you have no idea what's going on with those people. They're just at home, they're coughing, they're hacking, they're sneezing, and whatever, they're self-medicating, and then they go back to their lives when they get better. Now, say if they had the coronavirus, they would never know. So how many, it could be 10 times more, it could be 100 times more people. Because even they're saying that even many, many people can get the coronavirus and be a carrier for it, and so-called, have the virus but not show any symptoms, not get sick even at all, not even a cough, not even a sniffle. So you're not counting those people. Those people are also not being counted. So how many more times more people? That if there's, say, 10,000 people and 100 people die, that then you'll say, wow, that's 1 out of 100 people dying. But if you multiply that 10 times, you say it's 1,000,000 people, or let's say 100,000 people are infected, actually, when we only counted 10,000, then 100 people died. That seems a little less, serious. So it's important to keep in context that we don't really know what we're dealing with here. Apparently there's something, but is it as bad as they say, where they're talking about millions of people potentially dying from this? Maybe it's worse than something that we normally face, but is it so bad that we have to totally disrupt the entire human population? I'm not sure. I'm not so sure about that. So the other statistic that's equally questionable is how they count a coronavirus related death. Now, if a death is caused by coronavirus, that means the coronavirus is what is the reason why they died. However, people who have coronavirus and die, and they show they've tested positive for the virus, these are people being counted as coronavirus related deaths, regardless of the actual other factors that may have contributed to the person's death. excuse this interruption. Okay, I'm back. So excuse the children in the background. Um, so the statistics we have to take with a grain of salt. We have to question what we're being told here. But based on what we're being told, these are the kind of things that we're being subjected to: shutdowns of borders of governments. You can't travel internationally. You can't even go out of your house unless you have to go get groceries or something essential. Uh, Passport agencies are closed. You can't go, get your passport so you can leave the country. There's a lot of restrictions being put in place. Social distancing is also like the main thing that's being recommended to prevent the spread of this disease, which again, is having mixed results. They say it's so-called flattening the curve, but again, we just have to go by what they're telling us if we want to believe that. Um, these are some of the social distancing, guidelines being put out in Hong Kong, for example.
The government has banned group gatherings of more than 4 people in public places since March 29th. Any person who breaks the law will face a fixed penalty of $2,000 or, on conviction, a maximum fine of $25,000 and 6 months jail. We fully understand that foreign domestic helpers want to meet their friends on rest days. However, every one of us should reduce social contact to curb the spread of COVID-19. Helpers can discuss rest day arrangements with their employers, such as staying home to take rest or taking off on a weekday. Employers cannot force their helpers to work on a rest day without consent. Let's join hands in this epidemic fight, and please spread the message to your friends.
Chief Executive Carrie Lam visited Ho Lung Cook headquarters in Causeway.
So it's interesting the kind of measures people are putting in place in order to prevent the spread, and also penalize people who are not compliant. Other places are requiring that people wear masks when they're out. Uh, and recently, for example, in the United States, Michigan has put in an order that you have to, if you're possibly can medically, you have to wear a mask if you're in a store. Um, and also in Burkina Faso, we have similar measures being implemented in a few days, where you'll be required to wear a mask anytime if you're outside. Burkina Faso being in West Africa. So these are the kind of restrictions being put in place again, without really it being clear what's going on. Of course, our officials and our health professionals will be telling us they know what's going on. However, we have to, history has shown that that is always a questionable thing. Whatever they may be pushing on the public is going to have an agenda. For example, if health is really a concern for these governments, what about the different health risks that are being pushed on the public? Nowadays, we're not going to get into 5G today, but there's simultaneously a rollout of this 5G technology globally, which hasn't been proven to be safe. And actually, there's been more studies to show where radio frequencies are harmful. We also have, as has been for a long time, very numerous unhealthy foods being dumped on the public which, of course, the government hasn't made any measures to prevent. So now they're claiming to care about the public when the fact is, the people who are dying are the people who mostly have the pre-existing conditions because their bodies have been weakened by um, these other unhealthy things that the government allows and doesn't say anything about. So this kind of hypocrisy is what we can be, expecting and what we can be used to if we're paying attention from this modern government. So we're going to get into some other topics. One thing that we're seeing is again where if there is this disease, um, what do we do about it? One thing we have to look into is that because all this recommended social distancing that they're doing, um, it doesn't tell us what we should do if we get the virus, what we should do if we get a cold, whatever, how they're recommending, okay, if you get a cold, you're showing flu-like symptoms or what have you, don't go to the hospital and get a test, just stay at home. But they're not telling you what you should do to stay healthy. Take cough syrup, take a cough drop. You see, it's the same kind of lack of uh, natural remedies, home-based remedies that we've been used to for a long time. So, I even have a friend who who tested positive for the virus. She is a hospital worker. She cleans the room at Northwestern Hospital in the Chicago suburb, and she tested positive for the virus. She was having, a lot of, obviously, as you can imagine, health challenges. And, she was just told by her doctor, stay home, use her inhaler. She's also asthmatic, so use her asthma inhaler. And, call me in the morning, as they say. Um, Luckily, she's recovered. She's okay. I'm very happy to hear about that, however, it's concerning to me that she's not given any real remedy that she can take for herself at home. So when it comes to healing, aside from the medical system, we know that we have options. We know that there's many possible ways we can use to deal with diseases. However, maybe the general public isn't being made aware of many of these options that we have. Um, but let's say, clearly since before the modern medical system, has been as prominent as it is, let's say 100 or 200 years ago, everybody in the world pretty much knows that if they're sick, they have to find some certain plants that they can use to heal themselves. That's a known fact. It's only recently that that people are kind of not familiar with these kind of remedies because the modern medical system presents itself even by law as being the only option we can use. Even now today, I'm hearing that if you say that you're offering a natural remedy or a non-scientifically proven remedy for coronavirus, uh, then your video on YouTube, then it will not. I mean, it won't be allowed. It'll be banned from YouTube. So I'll have to put this disclaimer right now. I am not advocating a natural remedy for coronavirus. However, um, if you don't have a test to know if you have coronavirus or any of the this particular coronavirus or any of the other many coronaviruses or viruses that have been identified as coronaviruses or any of the many other viruses that have not been classified as coronaviruses that all cause the flu, and you don't have a way of testing the virus itself, then all you can look at is the symptoms of what the body is showing. And if the body is showing flu, the body is showing uh, coughing, runny nose, fever, mucus production, difficulty breathing, all the things that we're familiar with, sneezing, so on and so on and so on. Traditional healers know how to deal with that. We've been dealing with that for thousands of years as humanity, and we're continuing to do that naturally. So here's a couple of sources that we can use. For one, Ancosta Natural Healing. This has been a lifesaver for me, for my family. It's been it's been a great benefit for me many times, and I swear by the remedies that are provided by Ancosta. If you want to find more about Ancosta, you can contact the Earth Center. Go to theearthcenter.org. You can visit the Ancosta Facebook page, which is Ancosta, ANKHKASTA, N for natural and H for healing. Um, or you can just Google Ancosta Facebook and you'll find their Facebook page. Um, Additionally, I wrote an article on one of my other sites. I published it on the onepeopleproject.org. You can check that website out as well, and that has some remedies for respiratory issues as well. As well. So it's just a blog entry, and so if you look and you see something that could be useful for you there, I'm very happy to be of service. Now, despite this knowledge, we're let's say let me put it this way. I don't know if you've noticed or you've heard, but they're saying that people of color, Black and Latino, are dying uh, much more rapidly from this illness. One second. Excuse me. We're in quarantine mode. I hope you understand. We have to be at home with everybody. So the the people of color, Black and Latinos in the United States, are reportedly dying at double the rate of whites here in the country. It should be no surprise that the people who historically have been having more health challenges are the ones being dying because of this virus. Well, you can see in our communities there's problems with access to healthy foods. There's problems with let's face it, healthy food choices, healthy living choices. But it has nothing to do with Black people being more susceptible to the virus than whites. Matter of fact, when we were first hearing about this virus, there was this myth going around that, oh, Black people might be immune. The reason why is because we were noticing that while the numbers of people dying were growing in China and Iran and Italy and Spain and UK and then in the US, it wasn't hitting Africa. And up until today, the virus still hasn't hit Africa in large amounts. Let's take a look at this. In sub-Saharan Africa, by far the hardest hit country is South Africa. Now, again, let's compare South Africa to Bronx or Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn, New York, 3,000 deaths. South Africa, 79 deaths. And again, 79 deaths. This is the hardest hit country in Africa, aside from the Arabized countries in Africa, which are like North Africa, like Egypt and Tunisia and so on. Let's look at Angola. 2 deaths. Let's look at South Sudan, known to be a war-torn, impoverished country, 0. Let's look at Somalia, another one that they're always talking about. 16 deaths. Democratic Republic of Congo, huge country, 25 deaths. Let's look at Nigeria, and we can look at Nigeria, and Lagos alone is bigger than New York, and yet the whole country, 31 deaths. Lagos, what's that say? 16. So you can look at Africa. These numbers are very, very low. Now, if you go by the narrative that we're hearing about, which is, and again, these cases in Africa are not new cases. The disease has been in Africa as long as it's been in other places in the world. There's more, commerce and travel between Africa and China. There's so many Chinese people going to Africa for business. So you can't say that no one from Wuhan or no one from China was traveling to Africa. That's absolutely, false. You would expect more Chinese people are going to be going to Africa than the U.S., than to Italy, than to China. I mean, than to Spain, than to Iran. You see. But however, even though these cases may not have been registered as quickly as they were in other places, these cases have been there. Now, if you go off the common narrative that there's this exponential growth, then that 4,000 or whatever that we saw in South Africa, you will expect that 4,000 would be ballooning to 40,000 to 400,000 or what have you. The way that they're talking about it has in other places. So why is it not being such a problem in Africa? It's because of the natural remedies that are being used. It's because of the traditional knowledge that's being used. You see, you have people in the bush in Africa. Many people live in rural settings. I don't see it being very likely that they're practicing the social distancing protocols in the villages in the bush. Okay, and when they're getting ready to farm or what have you. So somehow they're avoiding these problems. But despite that, we still have people, these health people saying, oh, Africa is at risk. This or that is happening in Africa and this many people are going to die. Here's an article from Reuters that's saying that 300,000 people at least, and they're saying in the best case scenario is going to be over 300,000 people dying in Africa from this pandemic. Now, if it's 300,000 people, that's with the best case scenario. Without the best case scenario, they're expecting millions. But yet here we are, and this is within the next 3 to 6 months. We're already 2 months into the pandemic, and we barely reached 1,000 deaths, even when you take into consideration the Arab countries in the north of Africa. Okay. Let's move back to the news. This is covering some of the background. The reason why I wanted to talk about Africa, I really wanted to make sure that people are seeing that there's alternative ways of doing things, of handling things. We don't always have to handle things the way that the modern establishment is telling us to handle things. There's different ways of handling things, and oftentimes the answers that our politicians here are presenting are not the best ones. They, proven fact that these politicians, these presidents and so on don't care about the common people out here. So, we have to make sure that we're thinking, using our minds to come up with the best decisions for ourselves. So natural remedies have been working for humanity for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And yet nowadays, we don't look in, or many of us are not looking into those as options. So I want to encourage us to revisit that. Let's move to some more current events now that we've got done with our backstory. Trump is talking about already, starting to reopen some things, and there's this ongoing debate. You have on one side, you have Trump and some of the other, conservative or, Republican lackeys of his that are lobbying for quick reopening of the economy, Then on the other side, you have your medical people, and you have people who are, have interest in the medical establishment. And again, not necessarily for the good of people either, but more so because of their business interests, such as Bill Gates, such as Anthony Fauci, and others, who are advocating for this lockdown to continue until they can sell their vaccine to everybody. And now Bill Gates is advocating for a global vaccination. Everybody in the world should get vaccinated, and we'll get more into this guy Gates in another episode too. Unfortunately, there's just not enough time to talk about everything today. But I want to get into some of the backlash that we've seen lately in the United States and other places in response to the measures that are being put in place. There's been a lot of protests lately, for example, in the U.S., which have taken place over the last week.
Tonight, fresh anger rippling across the country.
I need my job. I need to work.
Restrictions.
Tonight, a tornado outbreak raking the South.
Yeah, that's a tornado moving ground.
In Georgia, a twister spawned by the very same.
Stand by. We're having some technical difficulties. One moment, please. So we have these. All right, 1 second.
Vaccine for at least 18 months. We cannot shut down our state for 18 months.
About their economic survival in the face of widespread shutdowns.
Small business is the lifeblood and oxygen to America. And if that dies, we die.
This following a wave of gatherings this week in places like Michigan and Kentucky, seemingly inspired by conservative grassroots efforts online. The passionate pleas coming as states like Texas make plans to open up their economies through a multi-step approach. First permitting state parks, then retail stores with pickup options by the end of next week, as COVID-19 cases in the Lone Star State continue to rise. North Carolina, Florida, and California have approved access to some beaches. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo reacting to these scenes of crowded beaches in Duval County, Florida.
They opened the beach in Jacksonville, I think it was, but some beach in Florida, and like the whole beach was filled. Yeah, because you have all this pent-up demand.
As 7 northeastern states, led by New York, continue to clamp down on regular activity without more testing. And every state on its own plan, the president ultimately approved this week, at the same time backing protesters.
Now, these are people expressing their views. I see where they are, and I see the way they're working. They seem to be very responsible people to me.
And going further, tweeting, "Liberate Virginia, Michigan, and Minnesota from stricter rules on social distancing."
Okay, so, what we're seeing now is this kind of back and forth happening. And usually, when I see that you have in the media one side advocating one position versus another side advocating another position, you will find that neither side is really keeping the best interests in mind of the people, because the people who are saying continue to shut down, mostly they are the ones profiting off of, what's going on. The people who are saying open back up, again, it's economic and business interest that people are showing more so than the concern for the public, you see. Because if there was concern for the public, there will be more questions about, okay, what can we do to help these people who are becoming sick from the virus? Or make sure that if people catch it, then they're less at risk for, serious illness or death. However, You can see here none of that being discussed. Trump, for example, a lot of people are really do not like Trump, and it's gotten to a point where anything that he says, it will be taken as though we should think the opposite of whatever he's saying. But again, we have to be thinking people. We can't just react to whatever's happening around us without thinking about it. If we can say Trump really doesn't have our best interests, what about these other people? Can we say we trust Bill Gates now? I don't know. I don't think that's smart. So let's take a little bit more time and assess what's going on. Let's look at here too. Not only in the United States, there's other places that are showing this level of distrust for the government. Say, for example, we have in Ivory Coast where they burned down a facility that was for testing of the coronavirus. It's been very interesting to watch, especially places that around the world reacting to what's going on. This is from Yahoo News. As you can see, they're burning down the facility, because they don't trust this government. Now, we haven't heard yet to say, oh, it's epidemic deaths happening in Ivory Coast. You still haven't seen a blip on the world news of widespread deaths happening in Africa. You see, because even if you can't test, you'll know if many people are getting sick and many people are dying. You're going to know that there's a problem. But they're in Ivory Coast. They're saying, we don't want to be tested. We don't want you guys, possibly putting something in those swabs that's going to be infecting us instead of taking a sample. And why would they think something like this will happen? It's not just an overactive imagination. These kinds of things have happened historically. So people are becoming increasingly skeptical of these health authorities that are coming supposedly bringing humanitarian aid to countries. In other news, as far as reopening countries or states. In Michigan, as a result of some of the protests, they have relaxed some of the lockdown measures. They have gone so far at some point as saying even if you go to, say, Walmart, there's certain sections of Walmart that you can't shop in because it's not considered essential. Like, say, if you wanted to go buy clothes, because your children are growing and they're busting holes in their socks and shoes, you can't go get socks and shoes. Everybody doesn't have an Amazon account and a credit card, you see. So also in Georgia, they're in the first phase of reopening, which even Trump has said that's a bad idea, but they decided they wanted to reopen, and they are now lifting the restrictions, if I'm not mistaken, on the restaurants and bars and the other places. Beaches open in several states, marinas open in some states as well. Most recently, the first country that I've heard so far to reopen, to nationally lift restrictions has been Ghana in West Africa. Ghana, again, it's a small country, but the population density is big. There's a lot of people coming in and out of the country, or a lot of international, travel to and from Ghana. So they, as of early this week, have started to reopen as well. So, so far that, as far as I understand, it doesn't yet mean that they have reopened their borders to travel to and from Ghana. However, they're internally lifting some of the restrictions. So it's a good sign that some people are now seeing that they, can kind of get back to business as usual, or at least get back to some sense of a normal life. The last thing that I wanted to talk about today is is something that's been kind of brewing for a while. For those who have been paying attention and who pay attention to Africa, what happens in Africa, there it's been well known that China has been in Africa. Chinese companies and uh, Chinese have been in Africa buying a lot of land, a lot of property, a lot of establishing a lot of businesses and so on. Now, once again, when these large and so-called wealthy countries are going around the world and doing what they call aid and assistance programs, or economic assistance programs, offering loans and things like that, that is a strategy of economic conquest, and it's very clear to see in this case, because of some of what's been happening recently. um, in China, there's some African population, in some areas fairly large African populations, and those African populations have been stigmatized because of the acts of maybe a few people who have rebelled against the um, social distancing and quarantine protocols. There's been a large backlash against African communities that they've been forced into additional quarantine. They've been refused services. They've been refused access just to go to the store or get into the mall. One story I was looking into, um, and some of this I have to give credit to the brother Wode Maya, who mostly has been known for covering stories about positive things happening in Africa, which I've thought is great. But he used to live in China, and so he has a background there where uh, he has some insight into what's going on, and also has several contacts there. So there's been a video circulating about a Chinese lady, or not, an African lady, and her husband, who went to a hospital and were denied care. And then, after that video went viral, then she went back to, then the Chinese government sent people to their house to take them to a hospital, uh, and then, get them care there. But then they kind of forced them to do a video praising the Chinese government. They went on a whole propaganda cleanup campaign of what happened, saying that they never were denied care, that it was a misunderstanding, and even they took them shopping afterwards, and gave them access to go to a mall, which previously they hadn't been allowed into, for example. There's another video that he put out recently, and we're gonna show, this play this little clip about how Black people in in China are being forced into quarantine.
This is going on. So currently, I'm in the hotel. But one thing that baffles me is that it is the Chinese people who are calling for all Blacks to be quarantined in hotels. Bro, I went to Ghana with my Chinese wife. When we returned from Ghana, we were quarantined in our home for 14 days. Right? Just 3 days after we had been released, the police came to our house again that the government has issued a new law And that, in fact, that law was made that very day, that very morning that they came. So we should go to and the law state that all blacks must be quarantined in the hotel. We came to the hotel before they arrange a room for you. You are made to pay. You are made to pay for the 14 days that you are going to stay in the hotel. It is not we blacks who are calling for this quarantine. I was first of all quarantined in my house for 14 days. So why can't you quarantine me in my house again for the second 14 days if you really want me to go into this quarantine for the second time? And when I completed the first quarantine, they gave me a document that if I move out, whenever I go out, I should carry that document with me because the police are arresting people, black people on the street. But the moment I show them that document, they will not touch me because they would know that I have undergone or have completed the quarantine period, and they will not touch me. But when we came to the hotel, the management of the hotel, they saw that document and they said, but you have been quarantined, you have finished your quarantine. So the manager was shocked that the police people brought me also to be quarantined.
I'm not making this up. This is from somebody who is in Guangzhou, China at this very moment as I'm talking to you. But someone.
So again, this is courtesy of Brother Wode Maya, aka Mr. Ghana Baby. Mr. Ghana Baby. If you haven't checked out his videos on YouTube, they're very informational about Africa and also this situation happening right now in China. That's WODEMAYA, Wode Maya. Now, again, that questions the motives of why Chinese will be so interested in Africa. Being interested in Africa, but no interest in African people, don't like African people, look down on African people. It's the same thing that we saw, the same kind of racism we saw from Europeans, so-called coming to Africa to save the poor African souls and bring them Christianity and bring them civilization and culture because they lack this, they lack that, and so on. And all they brought was death, suffering, conquest, colonialization, exploitation. And now we're seeing China in the beginning phases of another type of conquest. This is not something, the so-called development that the Chinese are bringing isn't something that we should celebrate when we can see clearly that the Chinese don't have that kind of interest. Even the Chinese government has been very vocal in saying that, there's nothing going on. There's no discrimination taking place against Africans in China, that nothing is happening. You see, if you're honest, and you care and you want to be, make things right, then you won't deny what's happening, that the whole world can see. So, it's clear there's no respect there. And so I can say I think it's a good thing, really, that China is being exposed because they're facing a lot of backlash. Even in Nigeria, we're hearing that in Nigeria, factories are being burned down, other facilities are being burned down in Nigeria. So here's a video that we saw on that.
Chinese company, the youths are angry. They said enough is enough. They don't want to take this trash. So as you're watching now, you can see what is happening. Even the police, they don't know what to do again. Men are hungry. No food anywhere. can see it by yourself. Even the Chinese, all of them have run inside.
So you can see there's a lot of backlash across Africa. You know, aside from that, we're hearing about Chinese people being rounded up in Guinea, and just other places where Chinese are facing a lot more resistance now. You know, on the other hand, you still have the same, you know, people who maybe feel like they're benefiting from the resources China is bringing, who's coming to their defense. But it's going to be much harder for China to operate. We can expect in the foreseeable future. So that was the last thing that I wanted to talk about today. And, you know, that's our news. That's Meridian World News today. And we will be bringing this back, you know, and hopefully we'll be able to at least come on a weekly basis to bring more news and cover, you know, this coronavirus, but also many other things. So wishing you all the best. You all take care. Peace.